They told him the war didn't need another human. And Lucas Hale almost believed them as the transport door slammed open and the desert wind hit him like a furnace set to 120 degrees, dry, endless, indifferent, his boots sinking half an inch into ash-colored sand that used to be a city, his suit reading oxygen thin, radiation borderline, survival probability dropping by the minute. But none of that mattered anymore, because Lucas Hale was already a man erased, stripped of rank, name, and purpose. Just another body sent somewhere far enough that no one would ask questions when it stopped moving. He stepped forward anyway, slow, deliberate, each breath loud inside his helmet, the static crackling like distant whispers he couldn't quite ignore. The sky above him wasn't blue but streaked with faint orbital trails, ships he'd never see up close again, people who had already decided what he was worth. And it wasn't much. His fingers flexed inside worn gloves, the fabric, stiff from too many missions, too many choices that had led him here. And still, his mind refused to settle, because somewhere in the distance, beyond the heat haze and broken structures, something moved. Not machinery, not the predictable rhythm of patrol drones. Something alive, something wrong for this place. Lucas narrowed his eyes, visor dimming automatically as the light spiked. A silhouette forming between shattered pillars of blackened steel, tall, unmoving, almost too still for a battlefield. And for a moment he considered turning away, because that was the smart move, the trained move, the move that kept you breathing. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead he adjusted his path by a few degrees, boots crunching over debris that hadn't cooled in years, the air carrying a faint metallic scent mixed with something softer, unfamiliar, like rain that hadn't touched this planet in decades. His heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from focus, the kind that came right before a decision you couldn't undo. And as he got closer, the figure sharpened into something unmistakably not human, skin catching the light in a way that didn't belong to this world, a faint glow beneath the surface like the last trace of a dying star. And Lucas exhaled, long and quiet, because he knew exactly what that meant. Trouble, the kind that followed you even when you tried to leave everything behind. He should have stopped right there, turned back, let the desert swallow whatever story was unfolding ahead. But instead, he took one more step, then another, and somewhere above, unseen but always present, something in orbit shifted its attention. Sensors waking, systems aligning, as if the galaxy itself had just noticed a man who was supposed to be forgotten. And Lucas Hale kept walking anyway, not because he believed in anything anymore, but because for the first time in a long while, he felt like something was about to choose him back. The heat shimmer bent the horizon as Lucas closed the final 20 yards, each step measured, controlled, the way you approached something that might disappear if you rushed it, his visor compensating for the glare as the figure resolved into a woman not from any world he had known, her posture upright despite the environment, as if the desert had simply chosen not to touch her. The faint blue light beneath her skin pulsing slowly like a quiet signal, steady, deliberate, and wrong for a place that had forgotten how to sustain life. Lucas stopped 10 feet away, close enough to see the details now, the fine lines along her jaw, the way her eyes tracked him without fear, only calculation, and something else he could not name. The wind pushed against them both, carrying dust that seemed to curve around her instead of striking, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence stretching until it felt like a test, one he had not agreed to take. His suit clicked softly as it adjusted. Internal pressure, reminding him of time, of limits, of everything that still mattered even if he pretended it did not. He lifted one hand slowly, not reaching for a weapon, just enough to show intention, and her gaze followed the movement with precise attention. Her voice came a second later, low, controlled, perfectly clear through his external receiver. "You are not assigned to this sector," she said, not a question. A statement, and Lucas let out a small breath. That fogged the inside of his visor for half a second before clearing. "Neither are you," he replied, his tone flat, neutral, the kind that gave nothing away. Her head tilted slightly, the light under her skin shifting with the motion, and something flickered across her expression. Not surprise, not exactly. More like recognition of a pattern she had not expected to see here. The sky above them hummed faintly, a sound most people would ignore, But Lucas did not. His eyes flicked upward for less. Then a second, just enough to confirm what his instincts had already told him. Something in orbit had adjusted position, and it was watching this exact spot. He looked back at her, and this time he saw it, the smallest tightening in her shoulders, the kind of tension that did not come from fear, but from timing, from knowing something was about to happen and having no intention of stepping away from it. "You should leave," she said, quieter now, as if the words cost more than the first ones. Lucas almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because he had heard that before, from people who meant it and from people who did not, and it never changed anything. "That makes two of us," he answered, shifting his weight slightly, not retreating, not advancing, just staying. The desert stretched out behind him in every direction, empty, indifferent, offering no cover and no escape worth taking. And for the first time since he stepped off the transport, Lucas felt something settle inside him. Not purpose, not hope, just a clear line between leaving and staying, and the quiet understanding that one of those choices would matter more than the other. Above them the hum grew sharper, almost a tone now, precise and focused, and the light under her skin pulsed once, brighter than before, as if answering a signal only she could hear. Her eyes met his again, and this time there was no calculation left, only certainty. "If you stay," she said, her voice barely above the wind, "you will not be ignored." Lucas nodded once, slow, deliberate, and for reasons he did not bother to explain, he took one step closer instead of turning away. The tone in the sky sharpened into something deliberate. No longer background noise, but a signal with direction, and Lucas felt it through the suit before he fully heard it. A subtle vibration along his spine as the external sensors struggled to categorize what was locking onto them. He did not look up this time because he already knew. The kind of attention that came from orbit did not need to be seen to be understood. It pressed down on you, measured you, decided your worth in fractions of a second, and beside him the woman did not move, her stillness no longer unnatural but intentional, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment long before he stepped into it. The faint glow beneath her skin intensified again, not erratic but patterned, a language written in light, and Lucas realized with a quiet certainty that whatever was happening here had nothing to do with chance. "You knew this would happen," he said, his voice low, steady. More observation than accusation. Her eyes shifted to him, and for the first time there was something almost human in them. Not weakness, not fear, but a weight carried for too long. "I knew they would find me," she replied, and the way she said they carried distance, history, and something unresolved. Lucas exhaled slowly, the air inside his helmet warm against his face, his systems flickering through warnings he chose to ignore. "And you stayed anyway," he added, and she gave the smallest nod. Emotion so slight it could have been missed if he was not watching closely. The sky pulsed once, a ripple of light far above that cast a brief shimmer across the desert, and then the sound changed, narrowing, focusing, no longer searching but fixed, the kind of precision that meant there were no mistakes left to make. Lucas shifted his stance without thinking, feet planting deeper into the ash as if the ground itself could offer something resembling stability. It did not, but the motion grounded him anyway. "Whatever they are about to do," he said, glancing briefly at the horizon that offered no escape, "it is not for me." She looked at him again, longer this time, as if measuring something beyond the obvious, and the glow beneath her skin softened, not dimming but changing, less like a signal and more like a pulse. "It is not for you," she agreed, "but you are standing in the way of it." The words hung between them, simple, undeniable, and Lucas let them settle without reacting, because there it was, the line drawn clearly now: leave and survive unnoticed, or stay and become part of something he had no control over. His jaw tightened slightly, a habit he had never quite broken, and he let his gaze drift upward for a fraction of a second, just enough to acknowledge the presence above, then back to her. "I have been ignored before," he said quietly, and there was no bitterness in it, just fact. It did not change anything. The hum in the sky intensified, now accompanied by a faint light that began to gather, not blinding, not sudden, but inevitable, like a storm that had already decided where it would land, and the desert around them seemed to hold its breath. The wind dropping just enough to make the silence noticeable, She stepped half a pace closer, close. Enough that he could see the subtle variations in her skin, the way the light moved beneath it like a living thing. And when she spoke again, her voice carried something new, not command, not distance, but a quiet urgency. Then understand this, she said. If you remain here, you will not be a witness. Lucas held her gaze, steady, unflinching, and something inside him aligned in that moment. Not because it made sense, but because it did not need to. He had already taken the step that mattered. The rest was just distance. And as the light above them gathered into something undeniable, Lucas Hale did not move away. The light above them condensed into a narrow column that did not fall so much as arrive, precise and controlled, stopping just short of the ground, as if respecting a boundary only it understood, and the air around Lucas shifted instantly, temperature rising by a few degrees, pressure adjusting in subtle waves that made his suit recalibrate twice in under a second. He could feel it in his chest, not pain, not discomfort, just presence, the kind that did not ask permission. His display flickered, with unreadable data, symbols that did not match any system he had trained on, and he ignored them the same way he had ignored everything that tried to tell him to step back. Because stepping back was no longer an option he recognized. Beside him she remained steady, but the glow beneath her skin had changed again, brighter now, synchronized with the column above. As if the two were part of the same conversation, Lucas turned his head slightly toward her, not breaking his stance. This is not just a retrieval, he said, more certain now than before, and she answered without hesitation, no, her voice softer than the hum surrounding them. It is a judgment. The words settled heavily despite the calm tone, and Lucas let out a slow breath, his visor catching the faint reflection of the light as it traced across the curved surface. Judgment implied criteria, and criteria implied choice, even if the choice had already been made by someone else. And what are they judging? He asked, his eyes flicking upward again, tracking the edges of the column that seemed to extend forever into the sky. She did not answer immediately, and in that pause he understood that the answer mattered more than the question. When she finally spoke, it was not directed at him alone, but at the moment itself. Whether something can change, she said, and for a brief second the desert felt smaller, as if everything had narrowed to the space between them and the light above. Lucas shifted his weight forward half an inch, grounding himself again, his boots pressing into the ash that offered no resistance, and he realized that whatever this was, it had been set in motion long before he arrived, long before he was even considered part of it. But now he was here, and that changed the equation whether anyone intended it or not. The hum intensified, not louder but deeper, resonating through his bones in a way that made the rest of the world fade into the background. And then something new happened. The column of light adjusted, just slightly, angling by a degree that no natural phenomenon would ever choose, aligning not just with her, but with both of them. Lucas noticed it instantly, the shift too deliberate to ignore, and her eyes followed it as well, a flicker of something passing through her expression, not fear, not relief, but recognition. It sees you now, she said quietly, and there was no warning in her voice, only truth. Lucas almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it fit too perfectly, ignored until the moment it mattered, and then suddenly visible in a way that could not be undone. That makes things simpler, he replied, his voice steady. And for the first time since he stepped onto this planet, he felt completely present, no past pulling at him, no future waiting to be decided, just this exact point in time. The light above pulsed once, brighter, warmer, and the air around them stilled entirely, the wind gone as if it had never existed, the desert holding its breath in a silence that was no longer empty, but full of attention, and Lucas Hale, standing in the center of it, did not step away. The silence deepened until it felt structured, as if every particle of air had been arranged with intention, and Lucas could feel it pressing lightly against his suit. Not force, not resistance, just awareness, the kind that observed without judgment and yet carried the weight of one. The column of light above shifted again, not moving through space but refining itself, narrowing by inches, intensifying in clarity, and his display finally gave up trying to interpret it, screens dimming to a Neutral state, as if the system itself understood it was no longer the highest authority in the room. Lucas let his hand fall to his side. Fingers relaxed, no longer anticipating a threat in the traditional sense, because this was not something you could aim at or outrun. This was something you stood in front of, or you did not. And beside him she drew in a slow breath, the first sign of anything resembling strain. Her shoulders rising just enough to catch his attention, the glow beneath her. Skin now steady, no longer pulsing, like a decision that had already been made. "It is adjusting to you," she said, her voice quieter than before, not from fear, but from focus, as if speaking too loudly might disrupt something fragile. Lucas tilted his head slightly, eyes fixed on the edge of the light where it met the air, just a few feet in front of them. "That does not sound like a good thing," he replied, and for a moment she did not answer, her gaze locked on the same point, following the invisible calculations unfolding above. "It depends on what it finds," she said finally, and the honesty in her tone left no room for reassurance. The desert remained still, no wind, no shifting sand. Even the distant heat shimmer had faded, replaced by a clarity that made everything feel closer than it should. Lucas could hear his own breathing, slow and even, and beneath it something else, a faint resonance that seemed to match the rhythm of the light itself. As if the environment had begun to synchronize with whatever was happening here. He took another step forward without thinking, closing the distance by less than a foot, and the reaction was immediate. The light brightened, not harsh, but undeniable, and the air warmed again by a few degrees, his suit compensating silently. And she turned her head toward him, eyes narrowing slightly. Not in warning, but in realization. "You are influencing it," she said, and this time there was no uncertainty in her voice. Lucas considered that for half a second, then gave a small, almost absent nod. "Then it is already too late to leave," he answered, and the statement settled between them with a kind of calm inevitability. Above them the column expanded at the top, branching outward in patterns that resembled nothing he had ever seen. Geometric yet fluid, precise yet alive, and for the first time Lucas felt something that was not instinct or training, something closer to understanding, not of what it was, but of what it represented. This was not a weapon, not entirely, not just a system executing a command. It was a decision point, a place where outcomes shifted based on presence, on choice, on something far less predictable than orders. He glanced at her again, studying the way she stood within it, not resisting, not surrendering, simply present, and he realized she had known this all along. Not the details, not the exact form, but the nature of it. "You came here on purpose," he said, and this time it was not a question. She met his gaze, and there it was again, that flicker of something almost human, something that did not belong to titles or roles. "I came because it would not follow me anywhere else," she replied, and Lucas let that settle. The idea that even something like this had boundaries, had rules it could not break, and that she had chosen this place to meet it. The hum deepened once more, then steadied, and the light above shifted its focus fully, no longer dividing attention, no longer scanning, but centered, completely, on the space they occupied. Together, and Lucas Hale did not move, not because he could not, but because for the first time in a long time, he chose exactly where he was standing. The light no longer searched, it settled, and when it did the space around Lucas felt defined, as if invisible lines had been drawn through the air marking a boundary that did not exist seconds before. His suit registered the shift as a pressure gradient, minimal but precise, like stepping into a room with different rules than the one he had just left. He inhaled slowly, testing it, expecting resistance, but there was none, only awareness, and for the first time he understood that whatever was above them was not trying to force an outcome. It was waiting for one. Beside him she did not move, her posture unchanged, but her presence felt different now, less like someone enduring the moment, and more like someone completing it. The glow beneath her skin stabilized completely, no flicker, no variation, a constant light that matched the column above in a way that was no longer coincidence. Lucas shifted his gaze to her, studying the stillness, the control, the quiet acceptance that did not resemble surrender. "You have done this before," he said, and even as he spoke he knew the answer. She turned her head slightly, enough to meet his eyes, and there was no denial there. only a calm acknowledgement. "Not like this," she replied, and that distinction mattered more than the admission itself. Lucas nodded once, slow, absorbing the implication. Whatever this process was, it had never included someone like him. Not until now. The hum above them softened, not fading but refining, the deep resonance narrowing into something almost tonal, a single sustained note that seemed to align with his breathing, his heartbeat, even the subtle movements of the air within his helmet. He felt it synchronize, not physically but perceptually, as if the system observing them had adjusted its scale to match his, and that realization settled into something heavier than fear, because it meant he was no longer incidental, he was part of the equation. He glanced down briefly at his hands, at the faint tremor that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with awareness, then back up, steady again. What happens if it does not like what it sees? He asked, not because he expected comfort, but because the question needed to exist. She held his gaze for a long second, the silence between them stretching without breaking. "Then nothing changes," she said, and there was a quiet weight behind those words, something that suggested that outcome had already happened too many times. Lucas let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. "And if it does?" he pressed, and this time she did not answer immediately, her eyes shifting upward toward the light, following something he could not perceive. When she spoke again, her voice carried something new, not certainty, not hope, but possibility. "Then everything does." The simplicity of it struck harder than anything else could have, because it removed all complexity, all interpretation, leaving only the choice to stand or to step away, and Lucas realized that was the only variable left in this entire moment. His presence, his decision, nothing else could influence what came next. Above them the light pulsed once, slow and deliberate. Not a signal, but an acknowledgement, and the air around them responded in kind, a faint ripple that moved outward for a few feet before settling again. He felt it pass through him, not touching, not altering, just registering. And in that instant Lucas understood something he had not allowed himself to consider before. This was not about her alone. It never had been. Whatever judgment was being made here required contrast, required difference, required something unexpected to exist within the parameters, and that was why he mattered. Not because of who he had been, but because of the choice he was making now. He stepped forward again, closing the distance until there was barely space between them, not out of instinct, not out of obligation, but because it felt like the correct position, the one place where the outcome could no longer ignore him. And she watched him do it, not stopping him, not guiding him, simply allowing the moment to unfold as it was meant to. The light above shifted one final time, centering completely, absolute in its focus, and Lucas Hale, standing exactly where he chose to be, did not step back. The air shifted again, but this time it was not the light that changed. It was him. Lucas felt it in the smallest ways first, the way his breathing slowed without effort, the way his thoughts stopped reaching for exits that no longer existed, and instead settled into something steady, something anchored, the kind of stillness that came not from safety but from certainty. He stood there inches from her now, close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin even through the suit, and for a moment the entire galaxy could have vanished, and it would not have changed anything about this exact position, this exact choice. Above them the column of light narrowed one last time, becoming almost solid in appearance, not blinding, not harsh, but absolute, like a line drawn between what was and what could be. Lucas did not look away from it, but he also did not step into it. Instead, he shifted his body half a step forward and slightly to the side, placing himself between her and the center of its focus, not dramatically, not with intention to challenge, just enough that the geometry changed, enough that the system observing them had to account for him first, and the response was immediate. The tone deepened, not louder but heavier, as if something vast had paused to reconsider its alignment. Beside him she inhaled sharply, the first clear break in her composure since he met her, and when he glanced at her he saw it. Not fear, not exactly, but something closer to disbelief. "You are altering the sequence," she said, her voice quieter than the silence around them. Lucas kept his eyes forward, fixed on the light. "Good," he replied simply, because for the first time in a long time, He was not interested in following a sequence he did not choose. The air pressed in slightly, a gentle force that suggested adjustment rather than resistance, and the light responded again, its edges shifting, recalibrating around his position, around the space his body now occupied, and Lucas felt it register him fully, not as background, not as interference, but as a variable it could not ignore. His suit flickered once, then stabilized, the internal systems no longer attempting to categorize what was happening, as if they too had accepted that this moment existed outside their design. He raised one hand slowly, not in defense, not in surrender, just an instinctive gesture that acknowledged the presence above, and the light reacted, a subtle pulse that mirrored the motion, not copying it, but answering it. And Lucas exhaled, long and steady. "You said this was a judgment," he said, not turning his head. "Then it should see everything." Beside him she did not respond immediately, but he could feel her attention shift, not toward the light, but toward him. And when she finally spoke, her voice carried something that had not been there before, not authority, not distance, but recognition. "It has never seen this before," she said, and Lucas allowed himself the smallest nod, because that was the point, not to fight it, not to escape it, but to change what it was. Measuring in the first place, above them the column expanded slightly at the base, the point of contact widening by inches, as if reconsidering the boundaries it had drawn earlier, and the tone shifted again, no longer a single note, but a layered harmony, complex and deliberate, and the desert responded, the stillness deepening into something almost reverent, as if the planet itself understood that this moment mattered beyond its surface. Lucas adjusted his stance again, grounding himself fully, shoulders squared, not in defiance but in presence, and for the first time since the light had appeared, it did not advance, it did not press forward, it held position, waiting, and in that pause Lucas realized what had changed, not the system, not the rules, but the expectation. It was no longer deciding alone, it was waiting for him to decide as well. And that realization settled into something quiet and unshakable, because Lucas Hale had spent his entire life following decisions made by others, and now, standing in the center of something that could alter entire worlds, he was being given a choice that only existed because he refused to step away. He did not hesitate, he did not look back, he simply remained where he was, between her and the light, and let that be his answer. The harmony above them deepened into something almost structured, not just sound but meaning layered in frequencies Lucas could not fully understand yet somehow felt. Like a memory he had never lived, the light held its position, no longer advancing, no longer narrowing, simply existing in perfect alignment with the space he occupied, and for the first time since it arrived, it did not feel like an external force. It felt like a question, one that required more than presence, one that required intent. Lucas stood there, shoulders steady, breath slow, and realized that remaining in place was no longer enough. The system was waiting for something clearer, something undeniable. Beside him she shifted slightly, not stepping away, but adjusting her stance as if preparing for an outcome she had already accepted. Her voice came low, almost lost in the stillness. "It is asking," she said, and Lucas did not look at her. His eyes fixed on the center of the light, where the air seemed to bend inward. "Then it should hear an answer," he replied, and with that he did something he had not done since stepping onto this planet. He removed his helmet, the seal breaking with a soft hiss as the hot, thin air rushed in, harsh and real against his skin. His lungs adjusted quickly, drawing in the dry atmosphere that tasted like metal and dust, but he did not flinch, did not hesitate, because whatever was watching needed to see him without layers, without protection, just human. He lowered the helmet to his side, exposing his face fully to the light, and for a moment nothing changed. Then the reaction came, not sudden, not violent, but absolute. The column pulsed once, brighter than before, and the tone shifted again, higher now, clearer, as if something within it had recalibrated to a new reference point. Lucas stepped forward half a pace, placing himself directly in the center of its focus, between her and whatever judgment was being made. And this time the system did not adjust around him, it acknowledged him. The light holding steady as if locked onto his exact position, his exact choice. He felt the warmth increased slightly, not enough to harm, just enough to remind him that this was not a passive moment. This was interaction. "You said this determines if something can change," he said quietly, his voice carrying without effort, as if the air itself wanted to deliver it. "Then start here." The words were simple, but they held, settling into the silence with a weight that matched the moment. Beside him, she inhaled again, slower this time, and when she spoke, her voice was different, softer, no longer distant. "Lucas," she said, and it was the first time she had used his name, the first time he felt seen not as a variable, but as a person within this equation. He did not turn, did not break his focus, but he heard it, and that was enough. Above them, the light expanded at the edges, not dispersing, but growing, the boundaries shifting outward as if the system was no longer confined to a single outcome. The harmony deepened, layers building upon each other in a way that felt less like calculation and more like recognition. And in that moment, Lucas understood the shift. It was no longer evaluating her alone, no longer measuring a single path. It was integrating him into it, rewriting the structure of what was possible based on a choice it had not predicted. He took one final step forward, fully committing his position, his presence now the defining center of the space. And the light responded not by moving closer, but by holding still, perfectly still, as if waiting for confirmation, waiting for the final piece. And Lucas Hale, standing barefaced beneath something that could reshape entire worlds, did not step aside. He simply remained, and let that be enough. The light held, perfectly still, and in that stillness something shifted that no sensor could measure. The harmony above no longer layered in uncertainty, but resolved into a single, clear tone that did not press or question. It acknowledged. The air moved again, slowly at first, a faint current brushing against Lucas's face, carrying the dry heat of the desert back into motion as if the world had been paused and was now allowed to continue. He did not move, not immediately, because he felt it, the change not around him but through him. The weight that had been pressing from above was gone, replaced by something lighter, not absence, but acceptance. Beside him, she exhaled, a long breath she had been holding far longer than this moment. And when he finally turned his head to look at her, the glow beneath her skin had softened, no longer a signal, no longer a response, just light, natural and calm. Her eyes met his, and for the first time since they had stood together beneath the sky, there was no distance left in them, no calculation, no role, just presence. "It has ended," she said quietly, and Lucas glanced upward once more. The column was still there, but it was different now, broader, less defined, like a boundary that no longer needed to be enforced. The sharp edge that had once divided space had dissolved into something almost gentle, a trace rather than a force. "Or it has begun," he replied, and the words felt right even before he fully understood why. She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod, not agreement, not correction, just recognition. The kind that came when two perspectives finally aligned. The wind returned fully then, sweeping across the desert in a steady wave that carried sand and heat, and the distant scent of something new, something that had not existed here before. Lucas lowered his helmet to his side, still holding it, but no longer needing it as a barrier between himself and the moment. His suit remained active, systems stabilizing, warnings gone, as if whatever had been monitoring them had decided there was nothing left to calculate. Above them, the light began to recede, not upward, not away, but inward, folding into itself in a way that defied distance, shrinking without losing presence until it was no longer visible, only implied, a memory written into the sky. The tone faded with it, not cutting off, but resolving into silence so complete it felt earned. Lucas stood there for a few seconds longer, letting the absence settle, letting the stillness transform back into the world he understood, and then he turned fully toward her, meeting her gaze without the interference of light or pressure or expectation. "What happens now?" he asked, and for the first time the question did not carry urgency, only curiosity. She looked past him briefly, toward the horizon that had once meant nothing and now seemed wider, more open. And when she spoke, her voice carried something new, something that had not existed before this moment. "Now," she said softly, "they will have to listen." Lucas followed her gaze, the desert stretching endlessly, unchanged and yet entirely different. Because somewhere beyond it, beyond this planet, beyond everything he had been told could not change, something had. And it had started here, not with a command, not with a weapon, but with a choice that had no reason to exist except that he made it. He let out a slow breath, the heat of the air grounding him again, reminding him that he was still just a man standing in the sand.